Questions?
Hi, yeah, so I have been thinking about not doing in the last week, like how to basically do it practically. And what I feel like every time I try to not think about me or like not like, so like I'll give an example. So let's say I am doing something at work and suddenly a thought pops up, which is, oh, if it's not gonna work or if I don't meet a deadline, uh, it's gonna be bad. So then I basically get myself out of that and I continue doing the work, and the thought also dissipates on its own. But still the
Correct.
but that
Correct.
but still the underlying reason why I am like working is for myself, is to like make provisions so that I can survive, I can live and like live well, like live in luxury, things like that. So I was wondering, because the inherent reason of me doing something is selfish, even if I try these like techniques of like not focusing on the thought and being more in the present, still is it gonna work? That's what I was pondering on.
Okay. The problem is that your insight is not well established. So let me explain. You're still identifying with the body and the body's needs and with your social self and your personal identity. Okay. Now, there's nothing, maybe some of that is absolutely necessary, of course, right?
Hmm.
But as you mature in your understanding, what will gradually happen is that sense of self will become lighter and lighter and more transparent. And so, as you begin to realize that what you're calling yourself is a construction, a fabrication, a concept, uh, and you begin to realize that all of the world is like this. The world is something that's constructed by the brain, as it transduces a more fundamental reality that is far beyond the senses or the brain, right? But the brain transduces it. Do you know what transduces means?
Yeah.
Okay, it takes one signal and transforms it into something else. Now, a problem is that people forget that the brain itself is also a representation. And so as you get closer to the realm of reality, you'll begin to realize that it's a it's a two or three dimensional representation and a narrative that's a fluke of being run through a body. Now, so you're not your body that you need to feed and that you need to shelter, correct? You're not that, clearly. Is that clear? Completely clear?
That's clear.
So there is a body, just like there is a body here speaking to you, but it's not. I guess I could say it is my body at one level of abstraction. Of course, I could say that, but at another level of understanding, it's just a body, and it just happens to be the one that reality or consciousness is. You could say using at the moment, or it's a representation that appears at the moment. But if you reflect on it, it will come and go. And not only that, there's not just one self there. That's sometimes when you don't identify with the body, right, or the
Hmm.
mind,
Hmm.
and that is the basis for not doing. Ultimately, there's nobody to be doing. I mean, things get done, but there's nobody to be doing it. I mean, it's just like your thoughts. Thoughts occur, but you don't need to do them.
Hmm.
The clouds, cross the sky and maybe it rains, but you don't need to do anything.
So if
You are all those things. I mean, and it occurs without effort.
Mm-hmm.
The world appears without effort on your part.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that helps, but it's when you have a deeper understanding, which comes from time and maturation of insight, then you realize you can't be doing. That's not what you are. Well, it's difficult to articulate. What is what is. If you want to add the word "I" to it, then that's going to create a different experience than if you don't identify with the construction that you're calling yourself at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense, but I want to go deeper into it.
Good. Let's go deeper into it.
So, like from what all the science I have read and from my own personal experience, I am I'm convinced, at least logically, or at least the way it seems to me, that I'm convinced that I'm not the body.
Good.
But there are still
That
two.
doesn't take a lot of science. I mean, you could just reason it out. If you lost an arm, you're still you. If you lose legs and arms, you're still you, right?
That is, but then we still haven't seen what happens if someone loses their brain, so like their head. Will they still remain that?
No. The brain is the transducer. So if you lose your brain, then there's no sensory input. There's just awareness.
Yeah.
But the awareness is not conscious, and there's no memory. Mm-hmm. Right. So as far as you're concerned, as a practical matter, you're asleep and not dreaming.
Mm-hmm. So I was asleep and not dreaming.
So you're unconscious.
Yeah. So even
there's no memory.
Mm-hmm.
There's no time. There's no memory. There's no sensory input. Mm-hmm. Your brain has shut that down.
Yeah.
Or what we're calling your brain. Remember, everything is a representation in 2 or 3 dimensions and in time, but that's all it is. Mm-hmm. The underlying reality is something very different than that.
So that also, I think I am convinced that underlying reality is something very different than what I experience.
Okay.
But there are two main fears.
So what are you in the underlying reality?
So that I don't know.
You are awareness itself. What else could you be?
I don't know.
Well, by a process of elimination, you can get there. In the traditional, who is it? Ramana Maharshi, his not this, not that is Neti-Neti practice, right?
Yeah.
As you don't know, you will start to eliminate things that you can't be, right? Mm-hmm. And then eventually you only end up with one possibility, which is awareness. But it's a creative awareness, but that's another step.
I mean, so far I have seen that there's an experience happening and there's an awareness of that experience.
And that's all there is.
Yeah, those are the two.
There's nothing else. Is there?
I mean, those are the only two things I was able to can't maybe confirm, but nothing else.
Okay, well, first there's the understanding of the emptiness of all phenomenon. And then there's the further understanding, which is usually missed by folks, and that is that consciousness is also the material, right? Material is consciousness, and consciousness is the substrate of that material. But it's also the appearance of consciousness at any given moment. Mm-hmm. So, like, what you're hearing right now coming from your speakers or whatever, that experience is consciousness.
Hmm.
It takes time. It does take time.
I think I can also get behind the idea that everything is presenting within consciousness, within that
It's not within
awareness.
consciousness. It is consciousness. It's very strange. But that's, like I say, that's a further step.
Mm. I think, but the thing is, that thing doesn't help me in my daily living because I have two main fears that keep on coming up. The first fear
Well,
is,
who said it was going to? I mean, it will help you with your daily living eventually, but
mm,
it doesn't help you at work particularly, except you're less likely to get angry, you're less likely to get depressed, you're less likely to get anxious, but it's a gradual process.
mhm.
That's why traditions like Buddhism are so powerful, is that they understand the problems of daily living, right?
Mm-hmm.
And traditions like Sufism understand the importance of wisdom in daily living. So you're not too greedy, you're not too selfish, but you're also you go along with the program, right?
Mm-hmm.
Poverty is not going to help anyone.
Mm-hmm. So that means the two fear I have, I will have to live with them unless I actually have an experience of the underlying reality.
The fears that you have are actually just elaborations of the fear of death and abandonment.
Yeah.
So those are the two fears, and those fears go along with your body and your mind, and those fears, but they're not part of you. You have no fear. I mean, the you with a capital Y. You have no fear, no anxiety, nothing like that.
So that part I
Because you go ahead.
yeah, so that part I can see that those fears are not me because they come up as thoughts and feelings and emotion, and I can choose to stay like detached from them. That I can do. That I have seen is definitely doable. But the fears, the root cause they come up is because I don't know once this experience ends what's going to happen, or if this experience goes bad. Let's say I get a disability or something and my quality of life goes down, then it's going to be suffering. So the reason is
No,
suffering.
not necessarily. Don't assume that. There could be growth too. There could be a growth and a maturation of understanding that goes along with disability of the body.
That also.
It's all much more mysterious than we realize. It's all much more, but that's why there's a field beyond good and bad. Meet me there. That's why that's such a potent little quote from Rumi, the Sufi Rumi.
Mhm.
So you may assume that it's good or assume that it's bad, but you never know. And depending on your level of understanding, then there, like they say, there's no good or bad. There's just the reality of what is, and the reality of what is this mysterious, you know, source of all that there is. And we as with our senses and our minds, we can't see beyond the surface. I mean, I don't know. Let's see. Are you familiar with the holographic principle?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, if you think about it, it's not intuitively obvious, but if you think about it, the only thing we can see is the surface of anything,
Mhm.
right? So even if we go in, let's say we're fixing a car engine, we go into the engine, we're still just going to see the surface.
Mhm.
It's just a different surface,
Mhm.
and that's also true scientifically.
I mean, if I look at my life, I can see that what I call good could be something else, and what I call bad could be something else. So that I.
Good. That's the first step, but so you're still calling it your life.
Mhm.
It's a life.
A life that somehow is experienced with by me or by my awareness?
Not by the small u, not by the small yu, but by the large yu, which is awareness itself, the universe, it's consciousness, it's the primary, it's the fundamental. That's what's having the experience, not the small yu. I know it's counterintuitive because we've been entrained right from infancy to believe that we're separate from the rest of the world, that we're separate from the universe. But we're seeing now through non-locality and other discoveries in physics, or although we've known this for millennia, that these boundaries that we create aren't the thing itself at all.
Mhm.
I mean, we could go into the ocean and create all kinds of boundaries and say there's a line between this part of the ocean and that part of the ocean. That a current starts here and it ends there, right? For example.
Yeah.
But that's just something that we do. It's not a fundamental reality.
Mhm.
So let's see if there's a way to illustrate that. Well, I think Hoffman's really good. His Donald Hoffman, the mathematician who just realized that what we see as objects, say in the room that we're in, are in fact no more objects than the icons on a computer screen. They represent something, that's true, but we don't know what it is that's underneath them besides our experience of them, our awareness of them, our consciousness of them. That is consciousness, that is awareness, that is experience. But now we're getting into the really, the advanced kind of Zen and flower ornament and Buddhist understandings that consciousness and you can't separate experience from consciousness. They're the same thing. And then as you get attuned, then you see that the universe is working with you. And so that's real not doing, when you can just be patient enough and watch. If your intention is correct, right, and you're sincere and you're honest about it, and you're patient, then what will happen is you'll notice that things are provided for you to increase your understanding, to bring you home. The universe is literally trying to bring you home, because the life that we live with our small identities and our close attachment to the body, all of that's not truth, right? And so truth always returns unto itself. So you don't need to worry about that. But if you just pay attention, you'll see. Have you heard of synchronicity?
I think I have heard it, but I've heard it in like scientific terms.
No, I don't think so. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Why don't you look it up? Why don't you give the audience, in case there is one, a definition of synchronicity?
Okay, synchronicity means
Ask Grok. Ask Grok.
rock. Okay. Whoa, they changed the interface just today. Yeah, it says synchronicity is a concept introduced by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, referring to meaningful
Carl Jung.
Carl Jung.
Jung. Carl Jung.
Carl Jung, referring to referring to meaningful coincidences that seem to defy logical explanation or mere chance. It describes events that are connected in a significant way, not by cause and effect, but by their meaning or purpose, often carrying a sense of deep personal relevance. For example, you might think of an old friend you haven't spoken to in years, and moments later they call you out of the blue. Or perhaps you stumble across a book that answers a question you have been pondering for weeks. These are the kinds of occurrences Jung would call synchronicity. events that feel orchestrated by something beyond random probability.
Okay, there you go. So as you have more understanding, there's more and more and more synchronicity until you realize that the whole thing is a setup. The universe is designed to bring you home. And so we don't see these clues and these helpful, things that are there to help us. Like the book that just happens to answer a question or happens to give you what you need to take the next step, or these episodes of telepathy or whatever. We don't notice them because we're working on a different model, a causal model, with causality at a level at which it doesn't exist. And so as we become more attuned to the universe in which we're actually embedded, then these synchronicitous events occur more and more and more often, and then you realize the whole thing is you helping you. Yeah, it's quite lovely.
I mean, I can like, so one way of life could be I chalk up everything to like mystery level, like everything is mysterious. I can't figure out, and just live life that way, and everything is gonna be.
Well, what is not mysterious? Name one thing that's not mysterious.
Then that would then that would mean that I as a human doesn't have the capacity to figure out what's better for me.
You certainly don't, right? You don't have the capacity to have yourself bored. You don't have the capacity to prevent yourself from dying when the time comes. You don't have the capacity to really, have you looked at David Hume on causality? And also we've got non-locality now. So we don't understand causality. We don't understand gravity. And these are mysterious things. And maybe we'll get a little closer, but we don't understand what energy really is any more than we understand what matter really is. We have these models that we make, right, that help us be somewhat satisfied. But if you really look at them, you'll understand that underneath both matter and energy and causality and being born and dying and even existing, it's all mysterious. And marvelous and beautiful too, if you look at it in a certain way. And what I'm here to tell you is that as you persist in your intention and your efforts, then you will have more and more of this. And the older you get, the more you'll have of this deeper understanding. And then not doing becomes your life. Like you imagine that you're the one that's thinking your thoughts, and you're the source of the thought. The source of your thoughts is, I guess you located in the brain somewhere, but your thoughts are more like trees or birds or something else. I mean, they come from someplace else. Now, they're more likely to, certain thoughts are more likely to occur to a particular brain because the brain is designed the way it is. But I don't think you control whether you're going to have a thought or not. And if you just reflect on it for a moment, if I talk about purple zebras jumping over the moon, that's not a thought that you would have had. But it goes in effortlessly into your mind, and now it's there. And that may or may not contribute to other thoughts you have later of cows jumping over the moon or something. So you don't get obsessed with that. That's not something that, I mean, you learn to take it more easy on yourself and not judge your thoughts so much. Just be more curious about them.
I think if I can get over behind the meanings of good and bad for myself, then it's not a problem to live like that.
Well, the Christian way, let me just give you the Christian adage that goes with that. It's the Lord works in mysterious ways. That's the Christian proverb.
But the problem I see is that there are so many people suffering, and
God works in mysterious ways. Well, there's so many people suffering. Okay, does that suffering, can you add it up into a big pile? Or is there just a certain amount of suffering on the earth? Can you add or diminish? I mean, so what do we mean by suffering when you're talking about somebody else?
suffering is like, let's say if they are living on earth for, let's say, 80, 90 years, then during those 90 years, some people go through hell for the whole 90 years, some people go through for a maximum of it.
It certainly looks that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But again, suffering. Okay, that's a mystery too, because I mean, the suffering. If let's say you suffered a year ago, is it additive? That if you're suffering now, do those two things add up? Or does the fact that you suffered more a year ago lessen your suffering? See, these are all things we don't have an understanding of. And I can tell you now that a lot of people that you would think would be suffering because they're poor, right? Or because they're uneducated, or because they're living in some remote part of the world. A lot of these people are happy as hell.
Oh yeah, that I've seen that. Even like in my villages, people who are poor, they have family and they are really happy. Just like go to the farm in the morning, come back home.
Yeah.
They have food. They have people to gossip, and
right, and they're content.
Yeah, they are content.
So contentment is a great wealth. Now, how did they acquire that? With a certain amount of humility. So humility can be very, very good for this, right?
But then,
but go ahead.
But that seems to be the case with people who probably have other things in order. So, like, let's say if someone lost a family member, right, their family, then those people are not able to live like that anymore, even in villages.
Correct. So, how much suffering? Okay, but the suffering that you're observing is occurring in your mind, right? You're imagining their suffering.
No, I even talk to those people, and then they tell me how their life is going.
They bitch about it.
Yeah, they tell me that how sad they're. Like,
do they enjoy bitching about it? Do they feel satisfied afterwards?
They probably will, because sometimes just sharing makes people feel better.
Right. So you have old people that just get together to complain, but they enjoy the complaining. Now, I'm not saying that this is a cakewalk. Life is very difficult, especially with the body, right? Because it's going to develop aches and pains and, old age suffering and death. These are all very real. But to the extent that you don't identify with the body, then you suffer less. I mean, you may have aches and pains or whatever, they're pain in the butt, but it's the same thing as suffering. So suffering, a lot of it depends on your attitude towards it. I mean, basically all of it depends on your attitude towards it. Now, I'm not trying to be Pollyanna. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist or anything like that, but I'm saying if you want to prepare yourself to deal with the slings and arrows of life, the best thing you can do is cultivate your insight and your forbearance, the kinds of things that, that have been advised for millennia, right?
Yeah, that I agree with totally. But my question...
And if you're not attached, then there's even less suffering, right? If you have less to be attached to, I mean, how many of the things that you're attached to, how many of the objects create as much misery as they do happiness eventually?
I feel like any object that gives me happiness is going to give me pain later.
Okay, there you go. So you know that now.
Yeah.
Some people don't know that. Now, I don't understand why there is suffering, except that it teaches, right? I mean, it's true with animals too. I mean, you learn from suffering, or you learn from pain, I'm sorry. And you learn not to do that. So you know that if you went and bought a bunch of antique, very beautiful antique furniture or whatever, you know that within 10 or 20 years, you'd be trying to get rid of it and it would cause suffering, right?
Yeah.
So that is the same thing with attachment to concepts or ideas. And so you learn the phrase I use is you learn to surf reality. You learn to go with it and not be afraid and not be greedy. And don't accumulate a bunch of crap that's just going to cause you pain later.
I think that also I totally agree with. My main question was about if Lord is working in mysterious ways, why do so many people are suffering and they don't have the tools, like they don't even have the knowledge that you are talking about here. So they're just like left to suffer.
Well, they're not left to suffer. And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that personally, I'd like to relieve suffering if it's possible somewhere, but there's much that cannot be. What can you, nothing, that's a separate issue than enlightening yourself or unburdening yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it may be there because they're there to teach somebody or to teach them. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we don't know, we can't quantify the suffering. Let's say a woman lives with her husband, I don't know, for 50 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he dies. Okay.
Yeah.
Is she, a year later, is she happier or less happy than she was with her husband?
I don't know. I can see both happening.
Exactly. You don't know. You can't say. But it's easy for us to imagine
Mm-hmm.
the suffering. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've seen people in prison, quite a few that were not suffering in prison. Mm-hmm. I've known many, many poor people, and they suffer less than many. I've known many rich people too. Mm-hmm. So all I'm saying is there's not much yield to that unless you're going to take a lesson from it. Mm-hmm. But the answer is I don't know why it's there. Maybe it's there because but where we came from and where we're going, there is no suffering. And maybe it's just like, going to a roller coaster or going through a horror movie or something like that. It's an experience that spirit has, so it appreciates relief of suffering or the absence of suffering. I don't know.
I think knowing that, like if somehow I knew that okay, people go to some other reality or dimension or whatever after this life, then that would have made sense.
Where else could they come from? Think about it. You're talking about some molecules in a spermatozoa and some molecules in an ovum, right? Mm-hmm. And you're talking about these molecules of let's say DNA or whatever. Now, from that, awareness and a person arises, or an animal arises. How do you get to that from these little molecules, which really aren't there anyway? There's some atomic particles, and they live in a quantum field of potentiality or possibility. So the people have it all backwards. I mean, it's a lot harder to explain the world using just the models that we have now than it is to describe a field of potentiality and possibility that emerges to create this and then goes back to where it came from. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But then you realize that this is reality. I mean, this world is also reality. Mm-hmm. Or consciousness. Experience is the only reality there is. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You have to contemplate these things, and that's the other thing. So if you want to get to not doing, you spend time and you think about things. And then if you're so inclined, you can I mean, these days you can discuss it with the AIs, but you could also read books. And the best books for this are in my opinion, if you want a short book, you can go to Zen or Tibetan Buddhism, Dzogchen in particular, Dzchen, or of course the Flower Ornament Scripture or the Avatamsaka Sutra, same thing. And these have been prepared for us. And so to take them for granted and to not use them, to me, just seems like not very smart. If you want to relieve suffering. But if you want to relieve suffering, you should start with your own, no?
Yeah. I think then I quickly just want to touch up on not seeking, that like Zen mentions, that if you're seeking enlightenment, then just the act of seeking is going to be an obstacle. But then they also talk about these like multiple stages where initially it's okay to seek because the mind needs to be prepared, but then eventually it should fall off.
Well, yeah, because you realize that you don't need to do anything. You don't need to try. You can just not do. The universe will take care of it. But until you realize that, there's things to learn, right? If you're going to facilitate this. Now, in Zen, remember that those guys are primarily in Zendos, or they're monks. And they get obsessive, right? And so that was something that they warned about. If you get too obsessive, then you're going to miss everything because you're just using your mind. And remember, this is all more subtle than gross effort or mental activity. So in Zen, they do make that warning. So again, the metaphor that I like is that of the archer. You want to pull the bow back just right, not too tight, not too loose, just right. And so, and also as you go through this, it becomes, at some point, it becomes effortless, and you stop progressing. Right? That's described in the Flower Ornament Sutra.
Yeah.
Now, with regard to the stages, we tend to think of the stages as, like a ladder. And once you've passed one rung, then you're on to the next one, like going through high school or something. Once you pass one grade, then you're finished with that and you go to the next one. But it's not like that. It's more like, as you understand what it takes to be the first stage, then you can move to the second stage, but you're still using what you learned in the first stage all the time. And then you go to the fourth or fifth stage, and you're still using what you have in the third stage. And so these are stages of understanding, right? Now, a stage is different than a state. And without your effort, without your trying, you realize at some point that, hey, my state has changed. I'm no longer an angry, bitter person. I'm no longer a person who feels victimized by my life circumstances. I'm no longer a person who resents this or that. I'm no longer a person who's disturbed by the noise of the world. Now, this is an endless journey, but what you want to get to is a different state of being. And then at some point you get to the state where you realize that, wait a minute, there's not a boundary between me and the universe, and there's not a boundary between me and other people, and there's not a boundary in consciousness whatsoever. And all of this is consciousness, and this world is like a play of consciousness. And then you say, well, wait a minute, this is a lot more mysterious and awesome than I thought, because if I wait, what I need will be delivered to me, whatever it may be. Now, it may not be what your body wants or what your mind thinks is the right thing, but that's how the universe, that's what that synchronicity that Carl Jung talked about, but other people have talked about it too. I mean, from the Taoists to the Christians and everybody in between, and the Muslims. So that's how they formulated the notion of God, right? The benevolent God, the merciful, the compassionate, and that is because the nature of the universe, it turns out, is like that. Mm-hmm. So you can use the word God if that appeals to you, but then eventually you get to realize that everything is God, like Jesus said. Mm-hmm. And consciousness or God or awareness or whatever you want to call it is right there with everything at every level the human could possibly imagine. Mm-hmm. So with the Christian, I think it is not a leaf falls that God is not aware of it. Mm-hmm. Right. So these are how they encoded this understanding. Mm-hmm. And then when you see it's a seamless whole and it has its own intelligence and its own direction and its own way of doing things, and then you get to the beauty and the truth of it. Mm-hmm. It's a different world. Mm-hmm. And then you begin to realize how many worlds there are possible. Mm-hmm. Right now. So again, the flower ornament, as awkward as it may be sometimes, or as bulky as it may seem sometimes, I can't think of a better way to entrain your mind to a much more a mind that's much closer to reality than I mean, I just don't know of any. I mean, the Sufi corpus will also do that, but that tends to be very very designed primarily for Muslims or deists or people like that, right? Mm-hmm. Although it's still very, very useful. I mean, yeah. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take that last statement back. I don't think it requires that. And I think that the teachings of the Bulla Nasruddin or the teachings of the great Sufi masters, of which there's quite a few, there's a very detailed corpus on the development of the human. Mm-hmm. So there we have at least two non-monk, not particularly religious in the sense that you have to go subscribe, non-dogmatic. Mm-hmm. Paths that have been translated into English. Mm-hmm. I mean, very recently, but they have been translated. Now, to do that, I might as well say this to the audience. To do that, you need an enlightened translator who understands the needs of the teacher, of the students in a modern Western society. Mm-hmm. Or you need something that's just so universal that it doesn't matter what the society or the culture is like. Okay. Questions about anything else?
Yeah, I have a couple of other questions too. One quick question. So sometimes situation is like really tense, like a high stake situation. And what I realize is, like, at that time, the only thing that really helps is just to like focus on like a meditation. So like just focus on the breath and just keep doing stuff. Thinking about,
that's good. Focused on the breath is good.
Yeah. So maybe I have not, like, the contemplation has not internalized enough that it's not able to help in those scenarios right now, but maybe it will start helping in the future.
Well, it probably has already started to help, but you haven't noticed it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, absolutely. And then when you realize that these are learning situations, they're testing situations, they're designed for you. I mean, literally, the universe is trying to bring you home. And these situations, they're there to, you'll learn that, wait a minute, you're too attached to this or that, or you're too rigid about this or that, or you need to learn this or that, or whatever. It's all part of one process. And you can't see it because your mind has created all these separate categories. Mm-hmm. And so there'll be times when you don't realize what you're learning at the time, but then later you realize, oh, that was there to teach me this. Mm-hmm. And so if you assume the attitude of the person or the man or the woman who wants to understand it's like a student or like a sincere person. You're there to learn and to observe and to learn and to enjoy. Mm-hmm. It's really quite extraordinary. And then you even learn from your pains and your suffering. Mm-hmm. So there's no room for magical thinking. The universe is plenty magical as it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Anything else before we stop?
I have one more question from Avatamsaka.
Okay, good. Can you read a little bit?
Yeah. So this is the chapter Ascent to the Palace of the Tushita Heavens.
Oh, good.
I think in this book, this is book 23. They are mainly describing like all the like giving a visual idea of how things are. So like 100 trillion ornaments, kings, and things like that.
Metaphors, right?
Yeah, metaphors. Yeah. So like for example, I just read like a few lines.
Okay.
Like 100 trillion celestial kings of the various heavens prostrated themselves reverently. 100 trillion Naga kings gazed fixedly. 100 trillion Yaksha kings joined their palms above their heads. 100 trillion Gandharva kings developed pure minds of faith. 100 trillion Titan kings cut off their pride. 100 trillion Garuda kings held streamers in their mouths. 100 trillion Kinnara kings danced joyfully. 100 trillion Mahoraga kings gazed with delight. 100 trillion world leaders bowed with respect. 100 trillion king of the heavens of 33 celestial realms gazed unblinking. 100 trillion kings of the Suyama heavens joyfully sang praises. 100 trillion kings of Tushita heavens prostrated their bodies. And it continues like this.
Right. So there's two elements, right? One is the numerosity, the inconceivable numbers of worlds and Buddhas and so on and so forth. And we could talk about that separately. But the thing that I want to draw your attention to is after it's a chant, right? So look at what they did. They danced joyfully. They bowed respectfully. They became, patient or something. So they're giving you a whole list of things that are recommended, right? Mm-hmm. In a manner that is not just a list. I mean, it's interesting because they have all these mythological creatures doing this, but they're trying to get it into your brain, right? Mm-hmm. And the repetition and the use of all these different characters make it easier for it to get into your brain and stay there. Mm-hmm. And then the numbers, that's a whole other universe of things to understand, right? We can talk about that later, like I said. But to get that part?
Yeah.
So start where you started before, but leave out the number, leave out the creatures, mm-hmm. and leave out the number. Just read what they were doing.
Okay.
So start at the same place. Go ahead.
So celestial kings.
Leave that part out. What were they doing?
Prostrated themselves reverently.
Reverently prostrated themselves. Okay, next.
Gazed fixedly.
Good. Next.
Joined their palms above their heads.
Good. This is Buddhist stuff. Go next.
Developed pure minds of faith.
Pure minds of faith. Good. Next.
Cut off their pride.
Cut off their pride. And so you see that this is they're it's very different than the way we teach in Western schools. But like the Sufi methodology, it's extremely sophisticated. We know that it's by repetition that things are learned or become common.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
But what was your question about it?
I think my question was that only. So like, what can I learn from this? Because it just feels repetitive, and like these actions they are talking about, but I have read them before as well. So
I know, but they're not totally absorbed, right? The idea is to get you saturated with it, to where the idea of cutting off pride, or the idea of bowing reverently, that. So what state of mind is one in when one bows reverently? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so it seems repetitive, but it's there for a reason. And let it go get into your bone marrow, man.
Yeah.
Or there's something about something faithfully or something like that.
Yeah.
So I know there are elements of it that are culturally bound, right? Like Yaksha kings and whatever, Garudas and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
If you can, you might as well look them up so you can see so you can visualize them just for fun. But if you try and visualize those numbers, that will also have an effect on your brain. What is it, 100,000 each time?
100 trillion.
100 trillion. Now visualize 100 trillion. Do it once, and then do that contemplation, 100 trillion, and then you'll have that forever. Once you've stretched your mind that far. But it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. So those are some of the things you can learn from it. And then, of course, those corresponds to the vast numbers of worlds, right? Now, so back in the 1st century, even before Christ, and then in the 2nd century for sure, they had an understanding of a multiverse. But a multiverse in consciousness, which is very, very different in one way, and not different in other important ways than some of the models people are coming up with now because of the problems they're having with quantum mechanics. The multiverse and so on and so forth. So there's a lot to contemplate here. And just do it, and then let it do its work.
Got it.
All right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot to learn from just those things. I know it doesn't seem that way at first. I know because I struggled through it. It wasn't easy for me the first or second time or whatever. And it's still, but it's doing something to your brain and to your mind. All right, sir?
Yeah.
All right. Take good care.
Yeah, you too.
You seem to have a cough there. Take care of that. All right?
Yeah, you
Talk
too.
to you later.
Yeah.
Talk to you later. Ciao.
Bye.